Hi guys, welcome to Yesterday's Coffee, the podcast where we chat about fitness, nutrition, business, and a host of other things all over coffee that might have been made yesterday. Today I'm drinking bone broth.
I still got coffee, so.
Do you want to try it?
Not.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
I'm sipping on bone broth because it just turned into fall weather. But today we're going to be chatting about macronutrients, what they are, why they're important, what they mean for your body, and how to include them in the right amounts in your diet, no matter what your goals are.
I'd say this is easily one of the most common questions we get as far as what these are, how to use them, what difference does it make. So we're trying to clear that up as best we possibly can today.
So I think the most important thing to start with is obviously what macros are. Mm-hmm. So macros are your macronutrients. So these are the nutrients that provide your body or can provide your body with energy. So the only nutrients that actually provide energy to your body, for the most part, are proteins, carbs, and fats. Mm-hmm. So proteins, we're talking about, more your animal products, meats, cheeses, dairy, things like that.
Sure.
Right? Carbs, we're talking about, breads, pastas, crackers, but carbs also contain, fruits and starchy vegetables, mm-hmm. which is something that some people are confused about.
Sure.
And then your fats can come from a variety of different places. Fats can be from animal products and animal proteins, but then you've also got plant fats like nuts and seeds, nut butters, vegetable oils, and things like avocados. So
a ton of different places that these things come from, whether you're talking about from animal products, from plants, there's tons of crossover. But before we really dive into each one of these, as far as what to do, how to kind of break them down and how it relates to your diet, I think we should definitely touch on what each one does and why it makes a difference.
Absolutely. So I think before we jump into chatting about proteins first, we should talk about why they're important, mm-hmm. just to begin with, or why they matter, because all of these different macronutrients have different roles. So even though they all contribute energy and they're all structural components in the body, they all, they're the building blocks for all the cells in your body, they all have a very specific different role. Mm-hmm. So I think protein is the one that gets overlooked the most because most people assume that they get enough protein.
Yeah.
And even, I think on a national level, the guidelines, like dietary guidelines,
right. That was going to be the first thing that I brought up.
Say that people get enough protein on a daily basis, and it's just not true. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's a big thing people miss out on because protein makes up all of your muscle tissue, mm-hmm. and it's a huge part of each and every one of your cells.
And major influence on metabolism, too.
Absolutely. And that, plays into the weight game. But just in terms of keeping your body alive, mm-hmm. all of your cells require protein. Yeah. All of the major components that keep your individual cells running, that keep your organs running, that keep your body running, all of those things contain protein.
Absolutely.
And all of those things, because they're being used over and over again all day, every day, have to be repaired and replaced on pretty much a daily basis. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't require an insane amount of protein, but probably more than most people are getting.
Yeah, that's definitely the common theme for most people that I see is under-consuming protein, way over-consuming carbs, sometimes over-consuming fats. That one I probably don't see as much unless it's just a bunch of crap food, but really being able to balance out the amount of each of these that are coming in, understanding how they relate to one another and why that's important is a huge deal. And so I know for both of us, one of our main focuses when we talk to somebody is protein first, mm-hmm. and really prioritizing protein in a meal. And there's a number of reasons for that. So protein as it stands is a macro that gives 4 calories per gram.
So energy-wise, you're getting 4 calories per 1 single gram of protein.
Mm-hmm. But our main goal in consuming protein really has nothing to do with energy, right?
Exactly.
So you're not actually consuming protein to fuel your activity. It's really there to help that recovery process and rebuild muscle tissue that may be broken down in the gym or just broken down from
living, being alive.
That's what happens. Yeah,
absolutely. So it increases your metabolic rate in terms of exercise, right? Well, I guess also in terms of eating it.
Yeah.
So the process of actually digesting and breaking down protein and flushing all the waste products out of your body actually requires more energy, so it can improve your metabolism in some way. But that whole process of repairing things in the body that have been broken down, so including, parts of cells and including muscle tissue, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of energy.
Yeah.
So in order for your body to use protein in the way that it wants to use protein, by default is going to improve your metabolism or improve the amount of energy your body uses daily.
Yes, absolutely. And with protein, how should one go about figuring out how much they need? Because we already touched on the basic federal guidelines are way too low. So where do we find what that number should be?
And so the guidelines that have been given to us, they are based on the amount of protein someone's body needs to avoid a protein deficiency.
Yeah,
so basically just stay alive, but the very bare minimum. So that's not performance related. That's not weight related.
Right.
That's not you feeling great every day.
It's not you living optimally. It's you surviving.
Absolutely. So I think the most common recommendation to get people enough protein is about a gram per pound of lean mass. So about a gram per pound of your muscle tissue.
That you weigh.
Yeah. Well, your lean mass, not necessarily your total weight.
Right.
Yeah. So the amount of lean mass or muscle mass on your body, because again, we're trying to repair and maintain the muscle mass that you do have. Now, for a lot of people don't know what their body fat percentage is or what their lean mass, weight is.
Sure.
So a lot of times we will make a general recommendation that follows about about a gram per pound of actual weight.
Right.
Depending on what that weight is.
And that's because that's a very simple estimation.
Because it's easy. Yeah. It's absolutely easy. If you have a larger amount of weight to lose, it might be a little bit less than that. Or if you're trying to gain weight, it might be a little bit more than a gram per pound of your own body weight. Right. But that's kind of a general guideline that's easy to follow.
Sure. And because an example would be if I've got somebody that's 300 pounds and wants to lose weight, I'm not going to tell them to eat 300 grams of protein.
Exactly.
Right. So that's where being able to understand where that estimation applies. So if somebody is more in the realm of maybe they're 200 pounds and they want to get down to 170, then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll use that goal weight as a target.
Sure.
For the protein. So instead of focusing on 200 pounds where they're at right now, I'll focus on that goal weight or somewhere around there as kind of pinpointing that lean mass that they're currently at.
Absolutely. And if this is something that you are thinking about trying, or if you want to improve your protein intake, I think it's worth noting that it's not always the easiest thing to do, especially if you're not somebody who loves animal products or you're not someone who loves protein foods or meats. It can be tricky. So you don't necessarily have to jump, if you're only eating 50 grams of protein a day on average, but we would recommend somewhere closer to, 170, like you said. It might be a process to get you there. So you wouldn't have to jump in all at once.
Sure. But with that being said, one of the things that I have people focus on when they do make this transition is prioritizing protein at each meal. So each time you sit down, the focal point of that meal should be your protein source. And then from there, fill in the fats and the carbs that you need.
Definitely. I tell my clients something similar of every meal should have a clearly identified protein source. Yeah. So you should be able to pick it out and tell me the portion size. Yeah. You shouldn't be like, well, I know that, peanuts have protein in them and I ate them as a snack after dinner. So
getting protein in your meal is not trying to add up the accidental proteins that come with the bread and maybe the toppings or whatever else is in there. It should be a substantial, easy to find source.
Yes. The only exception then would be, people on vegetarian or vegan diets who don't necessarily have a clear-cut animal protein source.
Story, sure.
In which case it takes a little bit more work and planning to put those types of meals that are high in protein together.
You've got to be more thoughtful.
So that's something that can be trickier, but still absolutely possible. It just, like I said, takes more thought, takes more planning.
And the same rule still applies.
Absolutely. You should still be able to tell me where it's coming from. Yeah. So if I ask you, as a coach and I say, for lunch today, what was your protein source? You shouldn't be racking your brain to figure it out.
Trying to count up.
You shouldn't be like, well, I know that my lentils had this and I know that, my vegetables had this much.
Right.
You should be able to say, oh, I had chicken breast for lunch today.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
Perfect. So definitely always prioritizing protein to a point. Obviously, there are other things that are important also, but that's the one that I think a lot of people miss the most.
Mm-hmm. And another reason why we focus on protein so much is how filling it is, right?
Absolutely.
So if you've got somebody that's trying to lose weight, which is the majority of people we both work with, then one of those big roadblocks that people run into is, well, I'm hungry all the time because I cut all these calories out. Well, if you start to focus on the right amount of calories overall and then prioritize protein, even if you're consuming less calories than you were before, because protein is so satiating and so much more filling, it keeps you that much more satisfied through the day.
Sure. Well, and I think it's important to explain in what way that it's filling. So it's not necessarily that it's taking up more volume, because realistically, if you're cutting down on your food throughout the day, you're cutting out a lot of volume of food. Protein doesn't necessarily have a ton of volume to it, but it takes a lot longer for your body to digest protein.
Right.
Meaning that digestion process happens a lot slower, keeping you fuller and satiated for longer.
Yeah, so it's that twofold thing with the metabolism where you consume more protein. Not only does it keep you more satisfied more for longer, but the act of that taking so much more time to digest and taking so much more energy to digest is actually increasing your metabolism and increasing the amount of calories that you're burning while you're more satisfied.
Sure. And then you can even compound that effect with some strength training. And if you're able to build any additional muscle, that additional muscle takes more energy to maintain and repair, therefore increasing your metabolism even more, or your metabolic rate, we should say.
Yes. And so with protein, is there ever a need to change the amount you're getting?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. If it fits into your schedule and you're able to get a certain amount of protein comfortably, it's going to stay about the same. It might change slightly with your goals, whether you're trying to, put on mass like we were talking about last week. That might require slightly more protein, but it's very minimal. The changes are going to be minimal.
Yeah. No, and protein is one of those things that is very much, the requirements are dictated on how much mass you have.
Yes. So it's all based on your personal body.
Yeah.
Whereas, carbs and fats can kind of change based on activity level and needs.
Yeah.
So
when we go in to actually adjust a plan for somebody that we're working with, protein typically doesn't really move.
Not too much at all.
Much at all. There might be some adjustments. The biggest time you would see an adjustment would be if somebody's actually changing the focus of their goal. Then there might be a flip there. But if we're just going down that path of either fat loss or even mass building, the protein is probably the one macro that's going to be staying fairly constant.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely throughout your goals. I would say maintenance requires a little bit less protein sometimes, or that you can get away with less protein if it's not your favorite kind of food to eat.
Yeah, whenever you're in that spot where you're trying to keep your body the same and you're not making a change to it where it's got to either build more or cut something, it's much easier to stay in more of a window than necessarily a specific amount.
Yeah, like a very exact amount.
Yeah.
So the other thing that's super important, or that, I think plays a bigger role in structure and, as a building material, is fat then. And fat is something that a lot of people honestly are afraid of.
Yeah.
Especially in like a weight loss program and even a mass gain program. Like fat kind of gets pushed to the wayside a lot, but it's very important.
Well, fat will give you a heart attack if you eat it too much, right?
That's not exactly true. Fat is definitely something that's been demonized for a long time.
Yeah.
And in the past 10 years, all the studies that have come out about, saturated fat specifically or red meat specifically, they're not as convincing as we thought they were, a decade ago.
There's one type of fat that is absolutely something to avoid.
Sure.
That's trans fat.
Trans fats.
No question about it. The problem is that a lot of older research kind of grouped saturated fats and trans fats together. And so that's where we get all this misinformation, really. So we're not going to go too deep into the theory and why all that's kind of happened. Maybe we'll touch on that another time.
Yeah.
But just know it going forward that other than trans fats, your body needs healthy saturated fats. It needs monounsaturated fats. It needs a host of different
all
things.
the different types of fat. It's just, I think at one point, maybe people were getting a little bit too much of the saturated fats versus too little of some of the others. But your body still needs them no matter what. Your body still has a requirement
it has to have them.
for saturated fats, and just fats in general, and things like cholesterol. So cholesterol is another thing that a lot of people are afraid of.
Yeah.
But cholesterol is actually the most, I shouldn't say the most important, but one of the most important building blocks for your hormones.
It's huge.
So your hormone levels and in things that, dictate the function of your brain and dictate your mood and things like that, they all come back to fat. Your brain is actually made mostly of fat. I forget what the exact percentage is, but that should tell you, your brain is made of fat.
Yeah.
Your body and your brain need fat to function and to feel good.
Right.
And then you've also got the added bonus that fats taste good and they're satisfying.
Yeah, they do.
They give you kind of this warm, yummy sense of well-being. So even on a weight loss program, you should never be avoiding fat. You should definitely make sure that you're hitting a certain minimum because, again, the size of your body and, lots of different factors, honestly, even your gender, male versus female, require certain amounts of fats and certain types of fats.
And I definitely think that fat isn't nearly as demonized as it was, especially you see the popularity of the keto diet and things in that nature that are actually almost celebrating fat and really focusing on fat, which is one way to do it, but not necessarily the only way by any means. But the real thing to take away here is that you need fat in your diet.
Absolutely.
It's not bad for you. Avoid trans fats, absolutely, but everything else needs to be incorporated in a balanced way. And so, touching on things energy-wise, fat is the one macronutrient that provides 9 calories per gram.
It's much more concentrated.
So you'll see any sort of diet that's laid out for you almost always, other than maybe very extreme keto diets, you would see fat is by far the least or the lowest amount of grams.
Yes.
Overall.
Lowest in grams.
And that's just because it provides more than twice the amount of energy per gram.
Exactly.
As anything else.
Definitely. So percentages, if you're looking at percentages of different types of macros, right? The percentage of fats might not be too much lower, but the actual grams are going to be lower.
Exactly.
So the other thing I think that it's important to talk about fats is the benefit to your joints, right?
Yeah.
So that's another thing, along with hormones and along with fueling, different things in your brain, it's super good for your joints. It goes into the whole lubrication process of your joints, especially some of those more anti-inflammatory fats, right?
Yeah.
So things like your omega-3s.
Yeah. So your fish oil supplements or eating actual fatty fishes, fattier cuts of meat, things that include eggs are also another really good source. So all of these healthy fats go a long way to keeping joints healthy and providing that type of nutrition, lubrication to those areas. And if you're lacking in that, you'll actually notice that feeling. You'll notice that your joints feel almost creaky.
Yeah, they're not working the way that they should be working.
Right. And so that is incredibly important, especially for people that are have more bodybuilding style goals and they start some sort of competition path. When you get to those points where you're really starting to cut down heavily on the carbs and especially heavily on the fats, you do notice that feeling in your body.
Oh, 100%. Well, because you're putting a lot more strain on your body than the average person.
Sure.
If you're...
But that's one way that you can very noticeably tell what those fats are doing.
Oh, absolutely.
In your body.
Well, and the other important thing is your omega-3s have to come in through your diet.
Mm-hmm.
You can't cut out all fats completely
Yeah.
because those fats, those essential fatty acids, your omega-3s, they're essential to the function of your body, but your body can't make them.
Yeah.
So your body's really cool. It can make a lot of things out of other things, and it can throw things together if it needs to.
Mm-hmm.
But your body can't make omega-3s on its own. So they have to come in through the diet. And the most concentrated source, like you said, is fish. And a lot of people don't eat enough fish or eat enough of the fatty fish, like, you know, the salmon or the good quality tunas.
Mm-hmm.
People are eating all this tilapia.
Yeah.
And like garbage whitefish that is not really giving your body the same nutrients that a fattier fish would give. Mm-hmm. So which is why we both recommend omega-3 supplements to most of our clients.
Yeah.
To all of our clients.
Fish oils
really.
Are awesome.
And, you know, for people who are vegetarian or are vegan, this is a really hard thing because there are plant sources of omega-3s, but the absorption is only about like 12%. Or I should say, I think the absorption, it's the conversion.
It's not good.
So the plant sources coming in actually have to be converted into the active form, which is the form that all animal sources come in.
Right.
So this active form is then what's going to have all those beneficial effects. But those plant sources, that conversion rate is only about 12%. So you could be eating, you know, all the walnuts and all the chia seeds that you want, and you're only getting a very, very small percentage of these omega-3s. Mm-hmm. Not to say that those foods aren't beneficial and that those plant omega-3s aren't helpful in any way. They're just not giving you the same benefits that those animal versions are. So, you know, if you hate fish oil or if you get that like reflux, you get some fish burps.
Yeah.
There are plenty of supplements out there that have essential oils added to them, like a lemon oil or a peppermint oil, or the ones that are kept refrigerated that kind of lessen any reflux that you might have. Yeah.
And that absorption is the reason why, unless I'm working with a vegan, which really doesn't happen, I'm always recommending to go with a fish oil supplement instead of something like flaxseed. And it's because you're actually going to be able to utilize a lot more of what you're intaking in that supplement versus the plant-derived omegas.
And there is something to say. I mean, plant omegas, they are potent detoxifiers. So your ALA, your plant version of omega-3s, is super, super potent for, you know, boosting your detoxification system. So your natural detox system in your body. So again, those foods are still important. They just have a completely different role than your animal omega-3s do. Sure. So they don't work exactly the same way in the body.
So now on to everybody's favorite topic, carbohydrates.
Yep. So now that we've got, you know, a baseline level of protein, baseline level of fat that are necessary for your body to function. So
these are your two essential pieces.
Essential pieces of the puzzle.
Find the essential amino acids in the diet as well as the essential fatty acids.
Absolutely. So once you have those two pieces pretty well down, carbohydrates are the thing that are going to vary the most based on activity level, based on goals, based on food preferences, honestly.
Based on how lean you are.
Absolutely.
And your insulin sensitivity, ability to use the carbs.
Because that is really important. Everybody utilizes carbs differently. Everyone's body processes carbs in a different way. And actually what we're learning more and more is that certain people are more sensitive to certain carbs. So, you know, maybe I eat ice cream and my blood sugar doesn't move at all.
Maybe.
And maybe
fairly true story. Actually.
You eat ice cream and your blood sugar goes through the roof.
Yeah.
But maybe I eat lentils and that spikes my blood sugar. So we're finding out that everyone kind of has different sensitivities to carbohydrates, which there's a research center that's trying to put together some sort of, what do you call it? Like calculation, basically, or an algorithm.
Like
to figure out, you know, based on somebody's DNA or based on somebody's, you know, genetics, how they're going to respond to certain carbs, which, you know, is not what we're really talking about today.
Right.
But that's just something to keep in mind, because as you go through this process, if you're trying to get to a goal and your body's not responding, that's just kind of another variable that we can look into.
Yeah, is the actual type of
carbs that we're eating.
Right.
But carbs, I think, are always recommended in the highest amount because it's not only a building material, right? We talked about all these macronutrients being both building materials and sources of energy. And your carbohydrates are your body's main source of energy.
Right.
So your body will use carbs as energy before it will try to use anything else.
Yeah, your brain uses it too as fuel.
Absolutely. Well, it's your brain's main source of fuel.
Right.
So your brain's made of fat, but it uses carbs to function.
Yeah, and carbs, going back to that energy requirement, are, again, 4 calories per gram. So just like protein, except that these, when incorporated in the diet, are functioning primarily as energy. Whereas the protein, we're not trying to get energy from that.
No. Well, your body is trying to use that protein to repair everything first. And it will only use protein for energy if there are basically no carbs in the body. And then it's a toss-up between the protein and the fat.
Well, and protein only becomes used as energy when it's actually converted to a carb.
Oh, yeah. It has to go through a whole conversion process.
So it's literally not even the protein itself that's being used as energy. It's when your body gets to a point where there isn't enough other energy sources, or you've over-consumed protein, which would be an insane amount of protein to consume, then it'll actually convert it from a protein into a carbohydrate to be used as energy.
It gets turned into sugar for your body to then use.
Yeah.
But your body does store a lot of carbohydrates. So you've got, obviously, blood in your sugar. We all know that our blood sugar responds to certain foods that we eat and responds to activity. But your body stores sugar in certain organs and in your muscles to use for things later. So your body actually stores a ton of carbs all the time that can be used for energy. And so when we're talking about certain fitness goals, using those carb stores or manipulating those carb stores can be helpful, you know, whether we're trying to put on mass or whether we're trying to lose body fat. So the way that we manipulate, or the way that we structure our diet and structure the amount of carbs that we're taking in, can help us target, you know, burning through carbs or burning through fat.
Right. And the amount you're consuming in the diet is going to be obviously based on your goal, but then part of why we limit carbs in the diet at certain points, if you're trying to lose body fat, is because we're trying to keep those stored levels of glucose a little bit lower, so that in your exercise sessions, you can actually burn through those and then tap into that stored body fat underneath.
Absolutely. And so kind of like we were talking about in, what was it, podcast number 2, maybe?
Yeah, 2 was fat loss.
You know, how you train and the types of activities that you do can target more carbohydrates or more fats.
Yeah.
So obviously for someone trying to lose fat, we're trying to target fat loss. So we're trying to keep all these extra carbs from, not necessarily keeping them from being burned, but we're trying to focus our body to burn through these fats first, which a lot of times involves taking our carb intake down a couple notches.
Right. And since carbs are primarily an energy source, and if we're trying to lose body fat, obviously we're trying to create an energy deficit there where we're burning off more calories than we're consuming. It makes the most sense to start by creating that caloric deficit with the primary energy source of carbohydrates.
Absolutely.
So you create that deficit there, and you can also do that to some extent with fats too, because fats are, again, a very dense energy source, and a lot of times I'll go back and forth between the ones that I'm removing from a diet as we continue on. But the difference with fats is that there is a bottom level requirement where you don't want to go below.
Well, and I mean, there is a bottom level requirement for carbs too. It's just because carbs are usually in the highest amount in the diet, you're not going to get to that bottom line sooner than you would get to the bottom line of your fats.
Yeah, but at the same time, there is a lot more flexibility with that, because you start getting into totally different schemes of like a keto diet where you're keeping carbs almost to nothing, and that's transition your body into ketones and everything else, which is we'll talk on keto specifically another day, but carbohydrates are very manipulatable depending on how you're going about. We're using it today.
Manipulatable, got it.
You have a lot of options with your carbs.
Absolutely.
And if I'd say the biggest determinant other than goal is how lean somebody is to determine. So you've set up how much protein you need in the diet because that's based on your size, right? Mm-hmm. And then if I'm accounting for the rest of the energy from fats and carbs, the determining factor as to how many of those extra calories are going to be coming from carbs, in my opinion, is going to be related to how lean that person is.
Definitely.
Because then we're getting into insulin sensitivity. And so that's essentially just how well can your body utilize this energy. So if you are somebody that has a lot of excess body fat, one of the kind of side effects of that is insulin resistance. And that is essentially, I'm bringing all these carbohydrates in, and because I've already got so much either sugar in the blood or storages of body fat, I'm not going to be able to utilize this energy nearly as well as somebody that's a lot leaner than me.
Definitely.
That's kind of the easiest way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm taking that into account, somebody that is in a position where they have a lot more weight to lose, I'm going to be making up a lot more of their calories from fats instead of carbs. Versus if I've got somebody that is already fairly lean, and even if they're trying to get leaner, they're going to be able to have a lot higher percentage of calories from carbs than the other person.
Well, and again, it also very specifically follows your activity level.
Yeah.
So those people who are a little bit leaner, who are still, maybe trying to lose some body fat, if they are leaner because they've already been more active, then their body is going to use carbohydrates a lot better, meaning that they get to eat more of them.
Yeah.
And because they have, more activity to fuel.
Right. Because that higher intensity is going to require carbohydrates as fuel.
Sure.
Whereas your lower intensity is the fats.
Because carbohydrates are instant energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So fats are more of this like long-term energy storage, and carbs give you this instant amount of energy. So if you're more active, you have more instant energy demands than someone who might be a little bit more sedentary, who, their body doesn't need like instant energy to be able to do a squat, or instant energy to be able to, go for a jog.
Right. Carbs are one of those things that you have to earn, right? Like it's
I don't like to say it that way. I wouldn't say it that way.
I would absolutely say
I would not.
I would absolutely say
I don't think that you have to earn any food ever.
So it's one of those things where carbs are a primary fuel for more intense activity. So I'm not saying that if you're not exercising, you don't eat carbs. What I'm saying is you have a lower
need. You just have a lower need for carbs.
You would have a lot lower need. So if somebody is performing a lot of high intensity activity, they need a great deal more carbs. That's what I mean by earning them.
Definitely.
You should always have, unless you're following something like keto, you should always have some semblance of carbs in the diet, and having that balanced out based on your activity levels is really important. So if I've got somebody that literally isn't exercising, I'm not really going to give them very many carbs. They're going to have some in here, but just enough for those basic requirements of fueling the brain and everything else. But if somebody is working a lot harder, doing a lot more actual physical work, that's where those carbs are really important to have.
Definitely.
That's all I'm saying.
Well, again, there's still a baseline for carbs because carbs are required for, certain functions or building certain things in the body, including, some hormones and some, like, specifically mood hormones, right?
Yeah.
Carbs can be linked to that. But carbs also are the things that feed our digestive system and our gut bacteria.
Yeah.
So I always think that there's a minimum requirement of carbs, but I do agree with you. Obviously, the less active you are, the lower those needs are.
Right.
So to summarize, obviously proteins and fats are things that we all have a minimum requirement of, or a more set minimum.
There's a definite minimum.
There's a definite minimum. Yeah. Protein is needed for the structure of your muscles and the structure of your cells. And those fats are going to go into building hormones and keeping your brain nice and healthy, keeping your joints nice and healthy, hair, skin, and nail health, with those fats, and then those carbs are more tailored towards your activity level. And those fats and carbs can be adjusted one way or the other depending on your preference and depending on how well your body uses either carbs or fats.
Yeah.
Some people don't digest fats very well and they need to eat more carbs. Some people can't digest carbs very well. They need to eat more fats.
Well, that's a great point you just brought up that I almost forgot about. Is preference is huge.
It's huge.
So,
it's absolutely huge. So if I have someone come to me and they could care less about fats, I'm going to put them on the minimum for their fat requirement. And I'm going to let them eat more carbs because that's what they like.
Right. Well, and weight loss, again, the biggest part of seeing that progress is the caloric deficit. And so as long as we're not impeding on other functions of the body by going too low in one of these areas, you can adjust your fats and your carbs pretty wildly and still create that caloric deficit and still see progress.
Absolutely.
So if you like having higher fats in your diet, you can bump those up and bring the carbs down to compensate, or vice versa. So it's not some set in stone thing.
Well, because at the end of the day, people are way more likely to stick to a plan if it's, food and meals that they enjoy and that they like.
Right. And if you're getting that caloric requirement right and you're getting your protein right, those are the two big ones. If you're getting both of those right and you've got a weight loss goal, and then how you kind of fill in the rest with the carbs and the fats can vary quite a bit.
Absolutely.
And still see just as good of progress.
And yeah, I think that there used to be a bigger habit of having these like set ranges or these set percentages or gram amounts for proteins, carbs, and fats. And what we found is obviously within this calorie level that we know is going to help you lose weight, that those things can change.
If you hold calories
they're manipulatable.
the same, manipulatability, whatever.
Yeah.
If you hold calories the same and you hold the deficits the same and you hold protein the same, but you change the fats and the carbs, you're going to see pretty much the same.
Well, and even adjusting the protein a little is not the end of the world.
Well, right. But again, that's going to be something that's pretty consistent with your weight.
Sure.
So whereas the other two, you can change them drastically. And so finding a way to make that suit what you actually enjoy is the key. If you want to have more fats one day and then drop your carbs a little bit to compensate, totally fine. And then
have a little bit more carbs the next
day. Right. You can do that.
That's okay.
That's
yeah,
totally
absolutely.
fine. It's about understanding the balance of those two, especially within the calories as a whole, and then ensuring you're getting enough protein too.
Yeah, absolutely. And ensuring you're getting your micronutrients and your vegetables.
Yeah,
so if you're looking at the plate, right? So if we're looking at the plate, no matter what our goals are, if we're looking at a plate, we should be able to clearly identify our protein source.
Yes, number one.
Clearly identify, where our fats are coming from, because they're necessary, whether that's a fat, used in the cooking process or a fat added on top of something.
Or just a part of the meat itself.
Yeah, or built into the protein.
Yeah.
And then we want to make sure that we've got some sort of vegetable or some, good, yummy plant thing.
Yummy plant.
Yummy plant. And then we would fill in the gaps with any extra carbs that were needed to hit our goal.
Yeah. So the
carbs kind of, not to say that they're the least important, but, they're the thing that's just going to kind of fill in the gaps.
They kind of are the least important. But
yeah.
So
I like carbs. I don't
prioritize your protein, make sure the healthy fats are there, and then make up the remainder with carbohydrates.
Absolutely.
That's pretty much
just
the
as a way to fill in the gap.
Order of importance. So if you're looking for kind of a basic overview of how to do it, that would be the train of thought to follow.
Absolutely. So those are your macros.
That's it. Macronutrients 101.
Thank you guys for listening. And if you have any suggestions on topics that you want us to chat about or cover, you can reach out to either of us. You can find Kyle at HypertroFit.com and you can find me at TheRootedRD.com. And we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, see you guys next week.
Cheers.